Benvenuto all'ascolto di The Audio Journey, la newsletter dedicata all'industria del digital audio. Io sono Mirko Lagonegro, founder e CEO di MDE Audio Strategy, e in questa puntata ho il vero piacere di intervistare Steve Pratt. Steve ha fondato e diretto Pacific Content, probabilmente una delle agenzie più importanti al mondo nella creazione di branded podcast, anzi di original podcast with brands. C'è una differenza sostanziale, come Steve ci spiegherà tra poco. Per Pacific Content ha prodotto serie di grandissimo successo, sempre parlando di questo formato di comunicazione, per clienti come BMW, BMW all'italiana, Facebook, Ford, Shopify e veramente molti altri. Azienda che poi Steve qualche anno fa ha ceduto a Rogers Media, uno dei più importanti gruppi di telecomunicazioni in Canada. Proprio in virtù della profonda conoscenza che Steve ha della nostra industria e della capacità di analizzare tanto il momento attuale che di ipotizzarne gli sviluppi, l'ho raggiunto per questa chiacchierata a Vancouver, in Canada. Hi Steve, it's a real pleasure to meet you again.
It's so great to talk to you again too. I really enjoyed our last time when we actually got together in person in Milan. It was amazing.
Yeah, has been really amazing. Steve, we used to starting our conversation from the Italian podcast market to have from our international guest an external point of view. As you said, we first met here in Milan in 2019 when we launched the very first Italian branded podcast, and you were keynote speaker at the OBE Summit, the early meeting of the Italian Branded Entertainment Observatory. At the time, the Italian podcast audience was about 7 million people. According to the latest Ipsos survey that has been published a couple of weeks ago, the audience has grown, reaching 12 million people on a monthly basis. And another survey, published by OBE, says that more or less the half of them listen to podcasts daily or at least weekly. So far, everything is fine. But at the same time, on the total Italian digital media market of almost 5 billion euro, the revenue of all digital audio supported by advertising is unfortunately around 30 million euro. And podcast advertising contributes for a few of them. And if we talk about branded podcast, the situation is similar, just another handful of millions. Here's the thing, there's a huge gap between listener and value. Steve, based on your knowledge, are there other countries facing the same difficulties we are? How do they succeed if they?
I think it's a very similar situation, almost everywhere. I know podcasting is not really new anymore, but I think it's still new enough compared to some of the other alternatives that are out there, and that it's not fully understood by ad agencies or all the companies that might be buying ads. Who might be more used to buying radio or television or ads on Facebook or Google or those sorts of things in terms of what they can get out of it and what they can't. And I think, in terms of the branded podcasts, it's an even bigger mindset shift to go, like if your normal status quo is buying ads, to shift into thinking about making actual shows and having to earn people's attention instead of interrupting it. So, my gut is that there's a lot of education that continues to be required to help people understand the value that podcasting can bring and why it's different than a lot of other platforms and how to measure it. And then on the branded podcast side, even more education around the value of earning people's attention for a long period of time by making great shows instead of interruptions or talking about yourself all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think as well that there are still too many brands who prefer to be the interruption, as you said, instead of being the content. They seem to look more for views or clicks instead of generating attention and interest. May I ask you your opinion about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think the default has always been, from an analog period when you had traditional radio and television, where there is this implicit contract between the media and audiences that we will watch or listen to advertising in order to get the shows that we want for free. And I think it's just been so firmly ingrained in so many, media companies and advertisers and ad agencies that that's the way things work, that not everybody has shifted their mindset to realize that the audience is the one that's in control now, and they can skip pretty much anything they want. And they do. They will not suffer through things that they don't want. They will skip things that they don't like or didn't ask for. And, when you kind of go back to the very basis of like, why is a brand creating advertising? It's to be able to reach people and talk to them and connect with them and to build relationships with them and to build trust with them. And I think in today's world, that math has changed, that interruptions aren't the best way to do that anymore. that making things that are valuable for people that are seen more as gifts to be given to the people you're trying to reach, to tell them a little bit around the things that you both care about or that you're both interested in, or to help share information that you have that'll make them smarter and help their lives. When you think audience first and creating value for them, and what are the kind of the gifts that you can give that are unique to you, to an audience, I think that's today's way of being a successful marketer and advertiser and building that trust and relationships that'll eventually turn into customers and revenue.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But let me ask you this. From your perspective, what could be the best way to facilitate this paradigm shift, if there's any?
Well, I think talking about it, I think doing things like this and writing about it and talking about it at conferences, is really, really important. And I think there's lots of groups that are recognizing the need for doing that and are doing a really good job with it. In the podcasting industry, I think the Sounds Profitable team of Brian Barletta and Tom Webster, are very much in that education space around trying to help talk to advertisers and ad agencies about podcasting and make sure that everybody has all the latest information and the best data that's out there. And they're doing a terrific job of that. And I think, honestly, it's a strange thing to say maybe, but I think all the companies that are working in this space have almost like a duty to help their clients find success rather than get people to say yes to doing mediocre shows. And some of that is pushing back on clients for their own best interest and explaining and giving context why. And I think, particularly because it's been a fairly hard few years in the global economy, where finding a client who says yes, you might be willing to push your prices down to the point where you're not able to make anything that's particularly good or that's going to earn a lot of attention. Or if a client wants to do a show that's about themselves with their executive team talking to customers about how great they are, it's easier to say yes and just make the show. I think it's finding that courage to actually say, let's talk about why you're making this show and what the business outcome you're looking for is, and then figure out how to accomplish that in a way that the audience is actually going to appreciate. Doing the short-term stuff of making mediocre quality or making things that audiences aren't going to be interested in, people will maybe try it once and they're never going to come back. And the clients aren't going to come back because they're not going to have listeners or time. So I know this is probably an unpopular message to say, push harder with every client to make great work. But it pays off in the long run.
I agree with you again. Maybe it could be not the most popular way to talk with a client, but I guess that is the most honest and long-term views-based message to deliver. Because if not, sooner or later, we're going to pay a very hard price for just to reach our budget target at the end of the year. So again, I totally agree with you. Let's say that we put away a little this overview of the Italian market, because I want to go into this new topic. Steve, introducing you to our listener, I told that since the beginning, the company you founded, Pacific Content, stated that we produce original content with brands, not simply branded podcast. It isn't just a semantic difference, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for bringing that up, because it was a really interesting turning point for our company. When we started Pacific Content, the website said we make branded podcasts, and it was very, very clear we were one of the only people on the planet that had such a strange business. But after a while, we realized that having the word branded podcast meant that we were attracting people who thought that they could talk about themselves and their brands and that the shows would be all about them. And I think there's probably a bit of a stigma around the word branded content, even, for audiences and for brands, around what that means. And we wanted to set a higher bar around that ability to earn a lot of attention and to build those relationships and build trust. And it was really trying to get the message out that when you're making something, you do need to think and act more like a media company, and that making an original show that happens to come from a brand is very different than a branded show, and that we were in the business of trying to elevate it and help people make real shows. And that, set us apart in the types of conversations that we were having, and kind of those tough conversations that that I was talking about. We could have them really, really early on, and kind of even avoid working with people who didn't want to make real shows in the service of trying to push the industry forward a little bit more, because it was so clear, like, this is the type of agency we are, and this is who we're for, and this is who we're not for.
I see. How many times you told to a client, no, this can't be done?
I would say we would strongly recommend. I don't know if we ever said no, but I think it was always a here are some of the trade-offs, or here are the pros and cons of doing it this way, and here's some other alternatives with different pros and cons. And so, there are perks of doing an interview format, and there are cons to doing an interview format, and there are perks to potentially having your CEO host a podcast, and there are cons to doing that. And for example, when we would have people come in and talk about why they wanted to have their CEO host a podcast, it would only be a one-take interview podcast. A lot of the pieces would either be, well, what's the CEO's schedule like? Are they going to be able to prepare for this and do research, and do they have a background in interviewing and journalism? And is your outcome to have that CEO look and sound really, really smart and have a really high quality show? Most of the time they have no time, they have no background interviewing. And yes, they would like everything to sound like, like they're a professional broadcaster. And so then it's like, well, in that case, you either shouldn't have the CEO as the host, or you should figure out a format that allows you to have higher quality, for your CEO, where you can have more options for making it sound better, so that your CEO sounds great, even if they're not a great interviewer, which means a bit more of an expensive format with more editing and different options in it, but it always pays off. So I don't know. In some ways, it's trying to lead the horse to water by just sharing your own expertise, in making shows and understanding what works for audiences, and helping them figure out what the best actual solution to their business goal is.
Yeah, asking what better fit for the audience. Steve, recently you founded the Creativity Business, a consulting company working, as you say, at the intersection of creativity and business. What does it mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of realized from doing a lot of work in the branded space, as well as working inside a creative business, the actual podcast company itself, that a lot of the issues with building creative companies are very similar to building creative content strategies, is that you have to figure out who you are before you can tell your own story in an effective way. And, whether you have a business problem and you can use creativity to solve the business problem by positioning yourself and differentiating yourself differently in the market, or whether you have a marketing problem that is not delivering business results, that you can go back in and figure out at the same time how to balance creativity and business to achieve results on both sides. That's where my focus is. It's thinking about what's the job that you're trying to do, and then balancing that out with something, we were talking about the gift earlier. For audiences, how do you balance the job, which is the business side, and the gift, which is the creativity side, to get the results that you're looking for? And I'm having a really interesting time mixing content strategy with kind of working with creative industries, businesses, and entrepreneurs and things like that.
Steve, all the best for the future, and thank you so much for joining to the audio journey. Thank you so much, really.
It's a real treat to talk to you again. I'm excited to be back in touch, and congratulations on all your success in Italy as well.
Questo numero della nostra newsletter termina qui. Se non l'hai già fatto, iscriviti alla nostra pagina e appunta alla nostra newsletter cercandoci su LinkedIn. Un saluto da Mirko Lagonegro.